you could tell us, what is your general outlook on the future of higher ed, and for that sake, the future of humanity?
On my worst days, but sometimes I feel a little bit like a hospice worker, like a hospice nurse. And I am in a system that is probably dying.
Welcome to Curious and Unqualified, a podcast about life in academia. I'm Eric Edlund, professor of physics.
And I'm Jeremy Jimenez, professor in the Foundations and Social Advocacy Department, and I'm very excited to welcome our first admin to our show. We will refer to her as Dean X at a California community college, and she's here to share her perspective of being an admin in higher education, especially in these harrowing times. So I'd first like to thank you for coming on to our show, and please, Dean X, tell us about your academic path. What did you study? How was your grad school experience, and how did you end up where you are right now?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my academic path was I was a first generation college going student. So I knew I needed to go to college at some point. Family was very supportive, but I did not really know how to do that. So I ended up going to a small liberal arts school for undergrad, which ended up being a very supportive place to be a first gen student. Once I was in it, though, I had a professor tell me I would probably need a graduate degree to do something with it. Had no idea about grad school, got connected with a TRIO program, which was the McNair Scholars Program, which really helped me be able to apply to grad school, kind of walked me through the process and gave me supports that I needed. And then from there, I got into a pretty good graduate program, and I went for educational psychology for my PhD straight from undergrad. So from there, did a postdoc, and then ended up as an institutional researcher at a California community college. And now I am a dean at a California community college. So that's kind of how I got here.
So I'd like to know, Dean X, what kind of training did you get in your new role as dean? And specifically, were you told what things you would need to prioritize, or were you kind of given wide berth to focus on things that you found to be important?
So administrators, I am now realizing, famously don't really get a lot of training to do their roles.
Somewhat similar to professors.
Who generally are teaching their whole lives without having been required to actually take any education, pedagogy, curriculum courses.
Yeah. So I had the benefit of having some teaching experience and some research experience. So I know how to look at data. I know how to analyze budgets just because I understand numbers. And I knew how to work with faculty because I had been a faculty member myself. But there were a lot of parts of being an administrator that I was not aware of. It's a very political position to be in. And I think I knew that and recognized that once you're at a vice president or president level, obviously. But I don't think I realized how political it was going to be at my level. So learning how to navigate that was a little difficult.
Did you have any mentors at all during your, or you assigned mentors formally or informally?
I did have someone that sort of tried to be one of my mentors, but during one of our first meetings, I asked them sort of like, how do you manage work-life balance as an administrator? And their response was, well, being an administrator is more of a lifestyle. And, the 40 hours that we're expected to work is really a minimum number. So I quickly realized that that person was not going to be my mentor for this process because I do admire work-life balance. So, yeah, I ended up finding someone that was a little bit more my style to mentor me, who had been a dean for a very long time and was now in a different higher level administrator position. So luckily, I did find my people.
Yeah, our school often markets it as a place where you have work-life balance compared to like R1 institutions. It's hard to imagine if our job is considered as having work-life balance, what it must be like at R1. But yeah, that's certainly work-life balance is a topic that might get like superficial treatment of its importance, but when it comes down to it, is frequently neglected and ignored at all levels of academia.
Dean X, I have a follow-up question for you here. You mentioned the political or the politics involved in administration. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, and maybe, if it would be reasonable to do so, give an example of kind of the politics that you've seen at play, either good or bad.
Yeah, well, California is a state that has unions, so unions often come into play when making decisions that impact the institution, which is generally a good thing. But the same way that, police unions sometimes protect bad actors, I feel like I've seen a similar thing happen in our context as well. Um, and I think the nature of my work, like I am very much in DEI type of work. Um, Whenever we try to do something or market something, a lot of times we need to be careful about the language that we're using, so as to not upset certain groups. Um, so we try to, like, for example, we have a training that we do, and we just changed the name of it because previously it had equity in the title, and now we're changing it to not have equity in the title. Um, and more focused on like teaching and learning, things like that.
And when you moved from being a faculty to an admin, have you found that you have now different relationships with faculty, that it's not as easy to maintain collegiality, sociality as it might have been before, or to what extent is that true or not?
So when I was at my current institution, I started off actually in what would be considered like a staff position because I was a researcher. And being a staff member in that environment is kind of like you're the lowest on the totem pole, um, in terms of both like union strength and like just hierarchy on campus. And that I actually really liked that I started from that place because I was able to build a lot of relationships with faculty members and just other people on campus from a like a from more of a collegial level. Um, but when I switched from being a staff member to an administrator, from literally one day to the next, I feel like there were some faculty that like no longer wanted to talk to me. And I was the same person. So that I had to kind of deal with that on my own personally. Like I felt like people were making assumptions about me when I was literally the same person, just in a different role, literally overnight, um, but still treated very differently. So I've been able to maintain a lot of good relationships with a lot of the faculty members that I had already known and worked with, and I continue to work with them and have generally really good relationships. But there are definitely some faculty that are like, oh, you're on the dark side now. I'm not going to talk to you anymore.
I think this gets at kind of a long running pattern that we maybe experience in academia, where on one side you have faculty, on the other side you have administrators, and of course there's necessarily a spirit of collaboration between these two aspects of institutions. But there there can also be a tension, especially in times of austerity or budget crunches, where faculty workload is increasing and these measures are being handed down to us by the administration who are asking us to do more with less. And so I can, in part, understand why things maybe feel that way and why some faculty members maybe began to treat you differently. But I'm wondering, from your perspective on the administrative side, uh, how do you think that you and other administrators kind of look at the body of faculty? Is it kind of like this obnoxious process of herding cats just a sea of chaos, or is it kind of more collaborative, or is it antagonistic at times?
I think in general, there is an attempt to be like as collaborative as possible. Um, I think from my perspective, when it feels like faculty are constantly making these like bad assumptions about certain things that you're doing or other administrators are doing, it can feel a little bit like, okay, guys, like let's just all get on the same page. So it sometimes can feel like a little bit of an uphill battle, or like you're working with someone that no matter what you say or do will not trust you. Um, but I think in general, at least for me as an administrator, what that's made me do is just work really hard to be a person of my word, like follow through when I say I'm going to do something, be really transparent about what's behind my action or my ask or my behavior, um, so that people understand where I'm coming from. So my reaction to that has kind of been to just try to be as open of a book as possible and say like, hey, like I'm only asking you to do this because we're getting this mandate from the state, or the budget really sucks, and not only are we asking you to do this, but we're asking all these other folks to do this, and I'm this is how I'm being impacted too. To just try to be more open so that you can try to build that trust, because it's really hard to work together when another side is just like willfully not trusting you. Um, but I come at it from a perspective of like there must be a reason, right? Like there must be a reason why certain faculty feel that way. They must have had really bad interactions with other administrators in the past. So trying to demonstrate a new um, a new example of like what an administrator can be.
I think this gets to another question I wanted to ask, which is from the faculty perspective. I think it's oftentimes very unclear to us why and how decisions are made further up in the administrative chain, right? Like for taking the issue of budgets, which are impacting almost every college across the country at this point, or so it seems. There's often cuts, or either to staffing in some cases, or cuts to programs and kind of maybe technical support, other things like this. But it's oftentimes unclear to us how these decisions are arrived at. They kind of just are kind of dropped upon us. Like, okay, in a couple of years, we're going to start moving people to a 4-3 teaching load rather than a 3-3 teaching load, right? And the actual crunching of the numbers to arrive at that conclusion is never, at least I don't think it's been shared in many cases that I've seen. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, now kind of in the administrative ranks, but not at the highest level, do these types of decisions seem like they're also kind of just dropped onto you, or do you have insight into how these things are decided and debated, and do you have, I guess, greater insight into the decision-making process than faculty do?
Mhm. Yes, I think I do have a little bit more information, but definitely not all of it. And there's definitely some situations where it's like not even I understand why this is happening the way it's happening. There's, I think, as I'm in it now, like normally the president of a college or university will have their cabinet, and normally that consists of their vice presidents. and the president with the vice presidents will make decisions about how certain things are going to go. Um, and that's kind of a closed door meeting. Sometimes decisions that are made in there aren't talked about further outside. So there is kind of a inner sanctum where some decisions are made that sometimes don't get explained. But I think also another thing is that's some people might see it as a benefit, some people might see it as a drawback, but in California at least, there are a lot of mandates that we get from the state that say exactly how we need to spend certain pots of money or exactly certain initiatives that we need to be implementing. So we get a lot of our guidance from the state. We have to meet a faculty obligation number where we have a certain number of faculty that are hired or employed. There's a lot of things that we have to follow from the state that kind of help guide some of those decisions. So the decisions that are solely at the behest of the president or vice president end up being kind of more about how are we going to implement these things, instead of what are we going to implement. And in California, we have participatory governance structures. So whenever we start talking about how we're going to implement something that impacts an institution, we have to do that by committee. So normally our committees are made up of representatives from all different constituency groups across the college. So that ends up being done as a group, which I actually kind of like. It does take forever. It does have its drawbacks, but I think it's good because you're getting input from all the different groups that are going to be impacted by that particular decision and how it gets rolled out.
And so you mentioned earlier that you had to rename an institution, right, as a way to kind of like not offend certain members of existing administration. So I'm just you can talk broadly about what has changed in your role, personally or just professionally, with DEI, and if you could describe maybe some of the programs, how they've been impacted or not, either because of like California protections or California, the blue state nature of it. So yeah, if you could just talk about how what's new and what's basically continuing on as before in this new era with regard to DEI and associated programs.
So I will say the pushback on the name was not from other administrators, it was from faculty. Faculty tend to be the loudest when it comes to our anti DEI voice on campus, which is really interesting. Um, but aside from that, I think we have been somewhat protected being in California, and being a community college. Like, by nature, community colleges themselves are a DEI program because we're open access. We take anybody that wants to go to college. Um, so we are the A in the DEIA. Um, so by our nature, we have to kind of embrace our DEI like selves. Um, Luckily, too, in California, we've been existing under Prop 209, which is essentially an anti affirmative action law that says we can't have any race based or ethnicity based programs. So all of our programs kind of are say very clearly that they're open to anyone that's interested. They might have certain um, populations that they're keeping in mind, but they all say like, yes, we're targeting first gen low income college students from a Latino lens, but this program is open to anyone that's interested. And all of our programs have to kind of have that caveat. Um, so when all the anti DEI stuff started coming out in February with Trump, um, there was a little bit of a panic, a little bit of a rush to kind of see, are we good? Do we need to change anything? Do we need to make sure um, we're being very clear about the intention of all of these programs? So we did do that, um, and there was slight panic, but at the end of the day, like, or the guidance we got from the state chancellor's office was, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're technically actually in compliance with a lot of those executive orders that came out because of Prop 209. So I'm just making sure we keep doing what we're doing and keep serving our students. That was the message we got from even up at the state. So that was really, at least for me, it was really empowering to know that even at the highest levels of leadership in our system, there we were getting that message to, continue doing the work that we're doing, that's what we're committed to. And as an open access system, we needed to continue to serve our student populations.
And we've been also getting similar messaging in the SUNY system as well.
Dean X, I have a question for you about DEI programs. Since there's so much discussion around DEI in the current moment here, with strong proponents and strong detractors of these programs, could you take a couple moments and just describe, from your view, like what is DEI and why is it a thing that you think that we should be doing at this point?
So I think of it the way that I think about how the McNair Scholars Program helped me when I was an undergrad student. I was mostly a straight A student, even in undergrad, but I came from a family that had never had anyone graduate from college, let alone like a graduate program. So when I needed that extra support or that extra guidance to be able to navigate that new process or system, there was this program there that was set up to help people like me navigate that process or system, not necessarily provide any handouts or easy ways out or up or in, but just kind of extra explanation of, okay, here's how you go through this and here's how you do it. Um, which for a lot of people, they get that through their family. Like if you have a parent that's gone to graduate school, they can probably help you through that graduate school process of applying and choosing an advisor and all that kind of intense stuff. So for folks that don't already have those supports because the system was not built for them or that particular population, I think DEI programs are programs that provide those extra supports for those students in particular. I also think about like our undocumented students on campus, like not only are they trying to be students and trying to kind of pursue their educational pathway and try to get that economic mobility, upward mobility, um, they're also navigating really intense and difficult legal processes. So our Dream Center, for example, helps provide some of those legal services to students to be able to navigate that while they're also trying to be students. So that's not even directly helping them with their courses necessarily. It's just providing that service of, we know you're trying to navigate a really complicated system. Here's some legal support. That's not necessarily making it easier for them, it's just providing them with that help.
I guess you could think about that kind of in the area of like counseling support or other things that colleges do to help our students with their lives outside of the classroom. Could you speak maybe to a little bit more about what happens in some of these other programs in terms like what does the support structure look like? What are some of the goals of these other programs that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I oversee 4 programs specifically, and each of those programs is kind of for a different population. And so, again, open to everyone, but with certain groups in mind. So, one is for first generation low income Latino students, one is for first gen low income folks of the African diaspora, and then formerly incarcerated students and our undocumented students or students that come from mixed status families. All of those different programs give that population of students a dedicated counselor. And for us, our structure is set up so that counselors can be mental health counselors or they can be academic counselors, like advisors, kind of helping you decide what your degree pathway is, and giving you some career counseling if you need that as well. So each of those programs has like a more academic counselor associated with it. Um, for students with a low income background, if they need support, like to get a free bus pass or a couple of different meal vouchers to go to our cafeteria, um, we do provide some things like that as well. But they do get that dedicated academic support through that counselor. Um, so they don't have to go to like drop-ins or something and get paired with a random person. They get the chance to build a relationship with this counselor. Um, some of those programs will take courses by cohort. So they'll be in like a little learning community together. So they're taking their math and English courses together with the same people. So, um, you know, that has empirical evidence behind it to show that it provides better student outcomes at the end, because you're maintaining and building those relationships. The professors talk to each other too, so they can have complementary lessons or topics that they're covering. Um, so yeah, those are some of the supports.
So in previous episodes, we talked about the enrollment crisis facing higher ed, and I'm curious, has that impacted your school yet? Is that what measures are you taking to boost enrollment? Is that within your purview, either to increase recruitment to your institution or to prevent attrition from your institution? So yeah, just and any impacts, if there is any sort of like budget crisis, how has it impacted morale at any level, whether that's student, faculty, administration, etc.?
Um, yeah, so our enrollment definitely took a hit in COVID. And I think everyone was surprised because, generally speaking, during recession times, enrollments into community colleges specifically are supposed to increase, because people are like, okay, now's my chance to go back to school for whatever thing I wanted to do. Um, but we saw the opposite, just like everybody else. So we are just now getting back to close to pre-COVID enrollment levels. So that is definitely a thing we talk about really often, is trying to increase enrollment. We know that we'll probably never get back to where we were just because like the population itself is decreasing. Like there's less and less high school seniors every year. So we know that we can't kind of rely on new students to be coming in at the same level. So one tactic that we've taken is to really focus on retention, and trying to make sure we're not losing students from year to year. Um, so I actually prefer that way of thinking about enrollment management, and how do you keep your enrollments up, is like actually getting students to want to stay and not feeling like they need to leave because they don't like it there. Um, so that's been really cool to see as an institution, everybody just trying to focus on making the space a welcoming, supportive one for all students as much as possible so that we do keep the students that we already have. Um, yeah, but it is something we talk about all the time whenever all the administrators get together. It definitely comes up in meetings and everything.
And there's also a disproportionate attention often to college, getting into college as opposed to finishing with the degree, right? So it is kind of, we probably need some rebalancing to focus on that as well.
I have a friend who is a department chair in a mathematics department at a community college in Northern California. And she has expressed to me over the last few years an immense amount of frustration with new policies that were handed down to them from the state of California. In particular, what they wanted to do was that they wanted to, if I'm recalling correctly, get rid of any kind of what were considered remedial math classes. And there's this sense that, yes, we want to see students complete, but we also need to make sure that they're, in some sense, getting good value for their money, and taking remedial courses that should have been high school material is not what we should be doing with them. And so something crazy happened, and I think I'm getting this right, maybe not exactly, but like the lowest level intro class they now teach in this mathematics department is, I think, probability and statistics. And so they've gotten rid of all of like the intro algebra sequences. And as we're talking about student support, this strikes me as just totally odd and really backwards. Like, how can we be supportive of getting students to a place of success if part of that strategy that's being implemented is to remove the courses that maybe provide them with foundational experience and knowledge to be more successful in the long run? I don't know if you've seen anything like this. Can you speak to the different forces that are at play here?
Oh my God. Anyone in California that hears math and the last like 5 years knows exactly what you're talking about. The legislation was AB 705 and then later AB 1705. And I actually, when stuff started stirring about AB 705, which was the first state mandate that came down, I was still the researcher. So I was looking at this from a researcher perspective of like, what are the numbers? What are the outcomes for these students? So what was happening, at least what the data was showing, was that there were some students that were placing, because you have to take a placement test when you come into community college to see what level to place you at for both English and math. There were some students that were getting placed into remedial math when they had taken like algebra 2 at least in high school. Just maybe because they were bad test takers, maybe because they didn't retain their algebra 2, like, but for whatever reason, they were seeing at disproportionate rates students getting placed at lower remedial levels when maybe they could have gone into like a higher level. And students were essentially getting stuck there, like unable to pass whatever the remedial math was to make it to the next level, and ending up needing to take like years of math because they were not able to pass. And after you've taken a class a certain amount of times, like you can't retake it like for a little bit, you got to basically take a break. So they were seeing that there were some students that would enter and never be able to transfer because they weren't getting past that math. The same thing was happening in English. So the state started, my understanding is that the state had started by saying, math English departments, please do something to help get students, out of remedial math a little faster, or do something to improve the placement processes, like maybe have a second layer of filter so that you can see like, okay, this person was initially placed here, but could they do something a little better? And they asked them to do that, my understanding is, for a few years, but nothing was happening. So when nothing was happening, then the state was like, okay, then we're just going to make it a law that students won't get placed into remedial classes. They will immediately get placed into a transfer level math or English. And there was funding attached to that mandate. So schools did a lot of different things with that funding. Some schools hired embedded tutors so that students would have a tutor in their classroom while they were taking that class to give extra support, like in real time. Some schools use that funding to create support courses that would then get attached to those transfer level math classes so that students could take a like 1 unit course in addition to the transfer level class to kind of give that extra support. Everyone revamped their placement tests to kind of just see what was the most recent math people had taken. So that's how AB 705 came out, and then AB 1705 was an even more intense version that I think a lot, maybe like 70% of people could get behind AB 705 once we had had a few years of it, and kind of saw, it was improving. The word was throughput. It was improving throughput, which was the number of students that were actually like completing a transfer level math. Um, and success rates weren't going down, so people weren't, failing at even higher rates. The failure rates were kind of staying pretty steady. Um, but AB 1705 was kind of a more intense version that was like, okay, now that we've done this, there's no prerequisites for science classes, no, and like other kind of crazy stuff. And I think that one is way less accepted, or it's harder to see the benefits of that one. Um, but I think now there's an overall realization that there are students for whom transfer level math right off the bat doesn't work. Um, and so now schools are being encouraged to maybe create non-credit courses for students, that maybe need something right before they take a transfer level math. And the non-credit course, what that does is, when you take college units, you're feeding into your financial aid, and you only get a certain number of years of financial aid before the government's like, okay, no more financial aid for you. You should have had a degree by now. So doing a non-credit course so that a student can take like a refresher math class before they get into something super intense is kind of the way schools are going now, so that you're not feeding into their financial aid. Um, the state covers non-credit courses, so it's really not a financial burden on anybody, the institution nor the student. Um, and students can get that extra support that they need that is now no longer really available to them. And the group that I think is suffering the most from that legislation is like students that have been out of school for a while, and like maybe they took pre-cal or calculus in high school, but high school was 10 years ago, and you don't remember that, you don't use calculus every day, so you didn't retain it. um, so I think those are the students that are probably hurting the most from that legislation. So I'm glad that they're rethinking it and thinking of like, okay, here's a potential path forward to address this population that, maybe they really do need a remedial math.
It seems crazy to me that state legislators would come in and mandate curricular changes at this level, at this level of detail. To me, this seems like way overstepping their authority, and such curricular decisions should be left to, well, the people doing the work. I understand on the flip side that there's, kind of an aspect of financial responsibility to this, because we are paying for financial aid for students. We need to see, you know, use our money wisely, right, and have some oversight of that. I just fail to see how this is good for anyone in the long run. I'm happy to hear that that people are working on other means, but I worry also that the logical consequence of this, as from the administrative perspective, is that you basically lean on faculty to inflate grades to improve success rates, right? To basically pass students through these courses. Do you have any sense of, like, kind of in the bigger picture, like how successful, how positive or negative this kind of legislation is for students, and what the ramifications are for faculty in classrooms?
Um, I think faculty definitely feel that pressure, um, of like, how am I supposed to pass a student that maybe needed to be in a different course to begin with. Um, I think of it, and again, this is sort of more my researcher hat than my administrator hat. I think of it more as an opportunity for faculty to maybe learn some different ways of teaching that they haven't tried before. Um, I think of like high school math teachers that have to learn about differentiation and trying to meet different students where they are in the classroom. and not having the luxury of knowing that all students will be able to understand calculus right away. Um, so I think it's a, like, when I think about it, both from a researcher perspective and a faculty perspective, it's kind of like what an interesting challenge as a teacher to try to be able to get all students to at least understand on a base level some aspects of statistics or pre-cal or whatever it is they might need. Um, the state coming in and telling faculty members what to do, yeah, that's really intense, but that's kind of the way California works. Like that was not the first time, and it probably won't be the last time that that happens. I do know that the state does work, so there's an academic senate for the whole entire state. So every school has their own academic senate, but there's also one that feeds up to this larger statewide academic senate. And I know that they are very active with the state legislature, and they are often communicating back and forth on these different mandates. So the statewide academic senate was actually like good to go on these mandates, because they had seen the data and they had seen the impact that it was having on certain groups of students. Um,
Isn't that data potentially clouded by things like grade inflation, or are you using other metrics of success outside of just grades?
it's not just grades, it's like even just getting to go through, like retaining. Like, were you able to go be in the class till the end? Um, yeah. So I think in general, because faculty, like, I would say this as a faculty member myself, like, I'm not gonna inflate somebody's grade just because someone told me that I should. Um, because that's my integrity as a professional. So I don't know that even if faculty are feeling that pressure, I don't know that many of them actually succumb to it. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thinking back to the conversations I had with my friend at this other community college, I got the sense that there was strong pressure to, one way or another, make sure that students pass classes. And there's some simple ways to make that happen, and then there's much more labor intensive, complex, and uncertain ways to try to make that happen. So you can kind of get a sense of like how things end up going.
Well, we're kind of pivoting from, grade inflation is not unique to any school, right?
No.
It's kind of pretty widespread. So I want to kind of pivot out now to think about, you can tell us, what is your general outlook on the future of higher ed, and for that sake, the future of humanity?
Um, on my worst days, I would say that a lot of times I actually described it to one of my friends this way as and this is so dramatic, but sometimes I feel a little bit like a hospice worker, like a hospice nurse. And I am in a system that is probably dying, and my job is to try to make the experience for everybody that's in it right now as comfortable and as close to their wishes as possible. Um, because I don't know that higher ed can exist as is for very much longer, especially with all the attacks on higher education in general and learning and intellectualism and all that kind of stuff. That's on my worst day. On my best day, I would say, you know, higher education is a system that's been around for a really long time, and it's looked different in different eras. But I think for the most part, it's pretty consistently been a means of upward socioeconomic mobility. And I think it could still be that. I know that with loan debt and all of that, that's not necessarily the case anymore. Um, but I think that's something we're going to have to figure out if higher education is going to continue to exist. Um, is how do we make it affordable for everybody so that you're actually not losing money by going to college at the end of it all?
So it sounds like you carry quite a burden on your shoulders here. I'm wondering, we talked earlier a little bit about workload issues. And again, from the faculty side, I think we often feel like there's a sense of workload creep or responsibility creep, right? More committee work, maybe more teaching duties, more pressure to support student success, which means doing more outside of class. Um, and I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you feel something similar as well? That like there's either explicit or implicit duties that continue to grow and that your workload creeps? And I guess kind of associated with this is, I think often from the faculty perspective, there's a sense that like institutions suffer from administrative bloat. And so one thing that I imagine happens is that, well, your workload doesn't actually increase because when there's more work that comes down through the administrative pipeline, you create a position, you hire a new person into those roles to help take care of that. But I have really no sense of whether that's true. That's really very much a hunch.
Yeah. The position that I'm in right now was created, I think, in about 2016. Um, and when it was created, it was one of the newest administrator roles that had been created. And like even today, faculty will still say that my position is part of administrative bloat. Um, but I will say I recently got put on my plate overseeing like a whole bunch of new programs, and there was no salary increase. There was no, I actually got a worse office. Like there was no like perk essentially of getting put more on my plate. Because the budget sucks right now. So there's no room for salary increase. There's no anything. So yeah, I heard the administrative bloat before, and I think some institutions do have it. Um, I think looking at myself and my colleagues and other deans and vice presidents, I see all of us pretty overworked. And I will say, like, being an administrator, my perspective has been my job is to make sure that that I'm helping the faculty that I work with, that I'm supporting the faculty that I'm working with, that should be one of my primary roles. Um, is doing all the administrative stuff in the background to make their vision of what they want to do happen. Um, so with all of the mandates and with all of the added pressure for faculty, I think I feel it too, because I'm like, okay, like what can I take off of your plate so that you can keep doing the things you want to do? Um, so yeah, it does feel like an increased level of workload. And not just that, but our faculty, because they care so much about our students and because of everything that's happening, like I know several of my faculty, not necessarily the ones that are associated with the Dream Center itself, but I've had several faculty come to me and say, like, I have a student in my class and or in my program, and she's really worried or he's really worried because their parent is undocumented and they're afraid that one day they're going to come home and their parent's going to be gone. So that emotional labor of like hearing that from the student and trying to help them navigate like what are some ways that we can support you, what are some ways that we can create like systems of support around you in case that happens or as you're processing that. But then I get to hear from the faculty like, man, like I wish I could do more. I wish I could, you know, find housing for this student or um, something like that, and then having to be the one to say like, well, we are not in a capacity to be able, like we don't have dorms, So we're not at a capacity to be able to provide housing, or there's limits to what we can do. But trying to be a space for them to be able to vent all the things that they've heard during the day. So it's like workload, yes, but it's also the emotional toll that the whole environment and climate is taking on everybody. I feel that too. It's that is making it really heavy.
Yeah, so going back to your worst case scenario with the where you're helping them hospice through, how much of that is the specific challenges of higher ed and budgets, and now with the whole Trump administration assault, and how much of it is it just this is, we're at the end of the energy cliff, and the consequences of modernity are really hitting us hard, and they will be continuing to hit us hard. So when you think about that emotional labor, how much of it is very specific to higher ed, and how much of it is like just your broad understanding of what's happening on Mother Earth and what that means for our near to medium term future?
I think because of the nature of the situation some of our students and even faculty members are in, it's more focused on like the now, like what's happening right now. I don't know if a lot of people are thinking even that much further into the future because they're shit's so bad right now that like to think even like a few months into the future, I think is hard for some people. Um, I know for some students, though, that is definitely weighing on them. Maybe these aren't the students that are worried about parents getting deported, but there's definitely some students that I've spoken to that are like, why am I even doing this? Like, by the time I'm 50 years old, like, this isn't gonna, what is the world gonna look like? Am I even gonna be able to be a professor or whatever it is they want to be? Um, so that's definitely a feeling of some of our students for sure. Um, but I think a lot of them are more focused on the immediate things impacting their life right now. Like, I can't eat, I don't have a place to live, I am worried about my family getting torn apart, that kind of stuff.
And what about for you? You said that's a lot of your students, but is it similar? You are so caught up with the current now problems you're dealing with as part of the emotional labor, or and how much of it are you kind of this larger, broader forces of what's happening, on our planet is weighing on you, and how do you like navigate that since most of your students and your colleagues are focused on the now? If you have a broader understanding of the severity of our problems, how does that weigh on your conversations and your interactions with students and colleagues? Like, do you feel like you should, because of how bad things are now with the current problems of higher ed and Trump administration, no one can handle that burden, and you try to like not bring it up? So I'm just kind of curious how you individually navigate that.
Yeah, I try to meet people where they're at. So like the students that I have talked to about like longer term climate change stuff, like they're the ones that initiate. Like they're thinking about that. And so I'll share with them my own thoughts and feelings about it if they seem willing to have that conversation. I think for the most part while I'm at work, I'll try to focus on whatever problem is brought to me. Um, I'll do my work and focus on my own fires, but um, if someone comes to me with something, I'll just try to meet them where they are and have whatever conversation they're wanting to have, whether that's a problem of right now or a problem of the future. Um, I think what the time I have to think about the future and what this all means, I definitely do that. Like on the weekend when I'm trying to take a walk and decompress, and then that'll pop into my head, and I'm like, why are we even here? What is this all for? So I think when I have those thoughts myself, I think about like like this is an okay thing to be doing right now, and I think I try to bring myself back to the present because when I get into my doom cycle or like doomer mindset, I think it can become very dark for me very quickly. And one way that I think about it is like, nothing is promised. Like this is a myth that I'm breaking for myself that, I might have always imagined that the possibility of me living to 80 years old was a thing that I had. But that's not true of anybody at any time. Um, like I could walk outside my apartment and fall down my stairs, and that's it for me. Um, so I think just coming to terms with that on my own, that, no matter what time we are living in, not tomorrow is not promised. And right now, climate change is looking really bad, and um, our future as a civilization is not looking great. But for my own individual life, like recognizing that any planning I was doing like is good and I should continue, but was never going to be promised no matter what the situation. So trying to live in that and live in the moment and just do things that make me happy or give me sense of purpose, which I think is what most people do.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think I share your outlook to for the most part. Yeah.
I don't have any further questions. Jeremy, do you have any wrap up questions here?
No. But is there anything we didn't ask you that you would like to mention, and or do you have any questions for us?
I will, this is not a question or anything, but I will say that like um it is kind of hard being, or like, how do I want to say this? You're told as someone that comes from like a first gen background or like a low income background, or you're just from a community where maybe you don't really see a lot of you in positions of power in higher education, even in the faculty ranks. So my thought was like, I'm gonna get there, and then faculty that are fighting to see people like me in these positions are going to be so supportive and like um understand like, wow, look at her, she like went from a first gen college student to being a dean at a school, like that like in one generation, like that's cool. The power speaks to the power of education. um so I think that was definitely a surprise to me when it was not that even though like I think faculty want that for their students, like when it actually happened, there was sort of like oh well, you're still just an evil administrator. And I think it's kind of discouraging when I talk to other administrators of color or administrators that are first gen also. It's sort of like, you work so hard to get there to affect change, to make things better for students that have similar backgrounds to you, and then one of your biggest people that are pushing back on you are the folks that maybe encouraged you when you were in college. um, and so that's kind of an interesting place to be.
Kind of with a sense that you flew too high too fast and they're a little resentful of how far you made it.
I don't know if it's necessarily that, but it definitely feels like, okay, you want to see change and diversity in the administrators, and when you get it, we're sort of treated like, oh, you're just going to be the same. Um, so it feels like very whiplashy almost. So yeah, I don't want to be like, oh, poor administrators, be nice to us, because not all of us deserve it. Um, but I think if you're someone that comes from a place where you had to navigate a whole bunch of systems that were not designed for you, like you're probably coming at it from a different perspective. Um, but we're not necessarily given that grace all the time.
Well, Dean X, I'm grateful that you are where you are and doing the good work that you are. And thank you for taking the time to share us your behind the scenes perspective of admin in higher ed. So, very appreciative.
Yeah, indeed. I appreciate all the insights you shared with us. I think we'll try to have more administrators on in the future because I think there's still more to unpack here. in this black box of administration that we all look at.
Well, yeah, you can add another trailblazing credential to your trailblaze for our podcast, our first admin on our podcast. All right, well, that about wraps it up. So thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned for future episodes.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.